There is a question that gets floated around that is a serious challenge to certain ways to understand the Bible. What happens to those who were raised in a culture that doesn't know about Christianity? There's a certain way of reading the Bible for which this question poses a genuine challenge. There are those that equate salvation with an intellectual or emotional commitment to certain historical and theological facts, or the performance of certain rituals. A closer reading of the New Testament will lead to the understanding that salvation is an outgrowth of God's justice and God's mercy. God's justice and mercy, as an outgrowth of His love, will prevail. As I have studied the Scriptures, one thing that has become abundantly clear to me is that we will not be saved or damned by a correct or incorrect understanding of history or theology, nor will we be saved or damned simply by doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. If salvation were by having a correct account of history or theology, then the demons would be saved. James 2 verse 19. If damnation were by having a wrong account of history or theology, then the Ninevites repented in vain. Jonah 4 verse 11. If salvation were by doing the right things, then the rich young ruler would not have needed to do anything else. Matthew 19 verse 20. If damnation were by doing the wrong things, then no one could be saved. 1 John 1 verse 10. In the end, no one will get to the end of their life and find that God owes them salvation. So no one can get to a place where they will be able to rest on the good they've done. When the sheep and goats were separated before God, none of the sheep said, "Yep, I did good and God owes me." Matthew 25 verse 37. Similarly, none of the goats will stare God down and say, "You can't damn me, I did right by you." Or, "You can't damn me, I said the right prayer." Or, "You can't damn me, I believed in you the right way." Matthew 7 verses 21 to 23. In the end, no one will get to the end of their life and find that salvation was more accessible to another person for reasons beyond their control. So no one can lock up and do bad the rest of their life because they're beyond salvation anyway. When the sheep and goats were separated before God, none of the goats said, "If I had only known what to do then, I would have been saved." Matthew 25 verse 44. That said, the gospel message is not frivolous. Those who build their lives on Christ's teaching will build on a firm foundation. Matthew 7 verses 24 to 25. I think that so many see contradictions here because they try to turn faith into intellectual acceptance and works into ceremonial activity and claim one or the other for their salvation. Neither that faith nor those works are of any value. Rather, to know God is to know love. 1 John 4 verse 8. And those who live a life devoted to love live a life devoted to God. 1 John 4 verse 16. And all the law and prophets are fulfilled in one rule, to love your neighbor as yourself. Galatians 5 verse 14. Though in this life we suffer from weakness and fail to live as we wish, God knows if that is us, or our weakness working against us, and if we do what we want to do, or if we do what is against our will. Romans 7 verses 19 to 20. There are those who have faith in God the same way that the demons do. They obey Him as they would a tyrant and think that this will save them. They prophesy and work and surrender all thinking they will outsmart God. In the end, God will say, "I never knew you." Matthew 7 verse 23. There are those who have never heard the message, but they see God because they see what good comes to the world when love is followed. These see God truly no matter what letters or syllables they attach to it, for God is not hidden. They feel for Him, and He is not far from them. Acts 17 verse 27. Though their society may teach them to worship Zeus or Eros or Sophia, they put aside their pursuit of power or pleasure or perception and truly serve the judge of the world that demands that we do right by each other. Within themselves, they recognize that the judge of right is above all gods, even if they don't call him God. There's a lot of room to see how all that works together. The entrance exam to God's kingdom might be open book after a lecture, or it might be sampling the weight of a bodily organ. In any case, I know that God will do right. We are not saved because we feed God's pride. The problem with the King of the universe analogy for God is that earthly bureaucrats work for us when we feed their fleshly appetites. Thus, women that flirt with male cops are more likely to get out of tickets, bribes get building permits through faster, and the best course of action when you're in front of a judge is to compliment them as much as possible. Whether they intend to or not, many pastors end up making God sound the same. Spend your life telling God how awesome He is, and He'll make sure you get that building permit approved in heaven. There's places in the Bible that you can pull that message out, but there are also places where this very thought is pushed against. There are those who complain about this line of thinking. They rightly say that God will do right, but then they try to turn that around. They use God will do right to mean that the thing they have extracted from Scripture is what God will do, and there's no sense complaining about it. There are those that declare, "This is what God expects," and build a case. This is why being in a society that seeks God and His righteousness, has received His revelation, and studies Him deeply and sincerely is a benefit. Romans 3 verses 1-2. A person who matures in a society where the righteousness of God is put aside for the pursuit of power and pleasure and perception, and doing evil is exalted because it feeds these human cravings, has all they need to see in front of them to know that good prevails and evil is punished, but they may never hear that from a teacher. However, it is equally true that a society could teach nothing but goodness and truth and beauty, yet there will still be people in that society that elevate power and pleasure and perception beyond the will of God. The excuse will not be heard that no one taught the lesson, neither will the excuse be heard that everyone in a society should be lifted up. Even with this, it is to be noted that sometimes we are honestly wrong about the good, the true, and the beautiful. However, there are times when we are confronted with the truth and decide to ignore it because it interferes with our pursuit of power, pleasure, or perception. John 15 verses 22-24, these will be brought to account before the next life, and God will not be deceived. Some of the ancients found the analogy helpful that God is building a perfect kingdom. Building from that analogy, this world is where God shows us when and where and how we pursue power and pleasure and perception above goodness and truth and beauty. Instead of justifying ourselves to each other and to God, we should learn when we are shown that we have failed. We are to be like children in God's classroom. Matthew 18 verse 4. Just as a kindergartner is inclined to run with scissors until taught better, we are inclined to seek power and pleasure and perception over goodness and truth and beauty until we learn otherwise. Once a first grader has learned not to run with scissors, he then follows the rules because they are the rules. The second grader follows the rules because the teacher is watching. The third grader may follow the rules because everyone else is. These, when free, still run with scissors. Those who are fit to enter God's kingdom are those who refuse to run with scissors regardless of the rules, and regardless of who is watching, and regardless of what their peers are doing because it's right. And when they learn that a situation demands that running with scissors is the right thing for a given emergency, then they will run regardless of the rules, and regardless of who is watching, and regardless of what others are doing. That is spiritual maturity. That is the goal. Judging a person's inner disposition is difficult. Even we get our own motivations wrong sometimes. There's a humility in recognizing that we can't even see our motivations in ourselves, and so we should be cautious in assigning motivations to others. Even so, if we seek the God who is love and acts as the righteous judge of the world, and if He is truly righteous and truly loves us, and we truly love Him, we can trust that in the end, He will welcome us into His kingdom, even if it requires burning away those things that are a part of this world. 1 Corinthians 3 verses 11-15. Love with the love that love gives, and in the end you'll find that you love the Father with the Spirit that Christ gives. That is enough. But those who depend on knowledge or balanced scales, or fulfilled obligations, or ignorance, or deception, or the righteous charity of others will find that they are in trouble. Do not be so sure of what you know. Love God. Do not rest because the scales are balanced. Love your neighbor. Do not do only what you must. Be what God would have you be. Do not depend on your ignorance. Seek to know God more. Do not think that you can deceive God. Do what's right. Do not think that righteousness can be traded. Join your life to God's purposes.